Thank you for tuning in to 95 Plus Podcast. And a big shout out to our sponsor for this episode, GH Grinding and Brewing Solutions. You can check them out on their website, ghgbs.com. They are the significant best grinding and brewing solutions for North America, Canada, and Latin America. So check them out on their website. Again, thank you all for tuning in to 95 Plus Podcast, and shout out to our sponsor, GH Grinding and Brewing Solution.
Sir, you check, you good?
Yep, I'm good.
All right, I'm good too. I guess that means there's only one thing to do.
Yep.
So, as we proceed to give you what you need, it's 9-5, y'all. Another episode of the 95 Plus Podcast.
What's up?
I am your host, Anthony Ragler, a.k.a. Dreadhead in the Lobby, not Chance the Rapper, more like Probability the Poet, and I'm here joined with Mr. Sexy Foam, the 2016 United States Barista Champion, world's finalist, top 6 and not 6, DJ Pez himself. Give it up for
Top
Mr.
6,
Lim
but
Butler.
not 6.
Yes, sir.
Ain't that the truth? Word.
How you doing
what's
today,
up,
man?
I'm good. How about you?
Oh, I'm chilling, man. It's been a calm Sunday. Kids going crazy as
Yeah.
usual, but you know we rocking out.
Man, ain't been calm in my house.
It's,
Not at all.
I mean, the Sunday itself is calm. The kids
Yeah.
are never. So
Right.
you know. I see
Yeah.
we got a nice little gadget here. You
Yeah,
wanna
yeah.
talk
So
to us?
so we got a new sponsor. Our
Yes,
first
sir.
sponsor.
Our first sponsor alert, y'all.
95
We
Plus,
we
yeah.
not broke no more. We still broke, but we not as broke.
Yeah, big shout out to GH Grinding and Brewing Solutions out in Durham, North Carolina. We've known them for a long time. Big shout out to Gary Horn, the owner, formerly Malkunig USA, the
Yes,
only Malkunig distributor in the U.S. I've known Gary. Actually, I talked about Gary Horn on one of the podcast
Yeah,
episodes.
I think you talked about on the last one.
Yeah. So like the 07 intro to Gary Horn and competition. But yeah, Gary Horn is the owner of GH Grinding and Brewing Solutions. He's got an amazing staff out there. Josh Kimbrough, got Mark out there, got Travis. So they've been, supplying grinders for, wholesale cafes, for roasteries, distributing across the U.S. So they actually dropped this off for me. This is the Chiato Life, the home grinder that you can grind for espresso, you can grind for pour over.
Right.
And I've been testing it out for about a month. I'm very happy with it. This is the probably the third home grinder that I've been testing out just to see what works best for espresso and then switching quickly over to pour over. And
okay.
so far, this is my favorite, over the other two. I won't mention who they are.
Yeah, okay. Nah, that's dope.
But this is my favorite out of the other two. So I mean, if you catch me on YouTube, you actually know who I'm talking about. But so I used this today to grind up the coffee that we're drinking. This
Yes,
is
sir.
Ethiopian coffee,
Okay.
and
Washed Ethiopian?
washed Ethiopian.
pretty clean, so
Yeah, it's pretty
figured
clean.
I'd check.
I did it on the fly, so I try to do like a 16-1, but it might be a little concentrated. Probably use a little more water. But
I mean,
Yeah,
I'm rocking
whatever.
with it. It's good.
it's all good. Yeah.
Man, Chiato's pretty dope. We actually used some of their grinders for the prelims that we hosted at Black and White.
Yeah,
So,
they were the grinder sponsor, GH.
Yeah, so getting a chance to test those grinders, like I get to work on quite a lot of different ones just through my time as a tech, and like it was my first time like running into this company, so like getting to see how they put stuff together, how their grinders work, the quirks that they prioritize over some others, like it's pretty cool. Like they're definitely fun to use. Can't wait to get some more touch time on it. Definitely interested in this one.
Yeah.
Because we got a couple of different home grinders and we got a lot of home enthusiasts that come to us. So I would love to get some time on that, see what I can pass along as knowledge to people when they ask. So
Yeah, I've done plenty of espresso on it. I mean, the freaking portafilter locks right in there.
now that's sick.
Yeah,
that's
it's
actually
dope,
pretty
right?
dope. To
Yeah.
have that like on a home one.
Yeah.
And you use what, the Flare at home?
I use the Flare. I have I used the Rancilio for a while. I'm working on the Micra right now.
Okay. So you got what, like 3 different ways to do espresso at home.
Yeah, well, 2 now.
Two,
I
okay.
put the actually I let someone borrow the Rancilio. Let them
Okay.
try it out. But
Word.
yeah, I like this a lot, man. Just switching back and forth. This is actually the 4th time I used it for pour over.
Okay.
Crazy. I brought the origami,
Mhm.
but I forgot the filters, so I had to borrow a filter from downstairs and kind of twerk it and
To
make
be-
it
to
make
be
it
an
fit
origami?
into the Chemex.
So you was like down there just like filtering it, like just folding and trying to get
Folding
it.
and yeah, crazy. So it turned out all right. You know, as
Nah,
long as you
so-
got a filter, you can pretty much filter
Look,
out the grounds, right?
At some point, water hits coffee grounds and then it becomes
Gravity does the work.
exactly right. That's it. We'll figure it out, man. So you might need
But
to-
the grinder's key, right?
I
Yeah,
mean,
the grinder's
I
key.
done seen people brew through like mesh shocks before. I done
Yep.
seen a bunch of like craziness. So like, look, if you at least got a filter, you working with something, man.
Yeah, for real.
But yeah, man. Nah, you just said this is an Ethiopian we're drinking, and a little birdie told me that you are gonna be out in Ethiopia in a couple of weeks.
Yeah,
Right.
actually, it's a 2-part trip that we actually sponsored at Black and White. We helped sponsor Coffee Black to do the barista exchange. So they had 14, 15 applicants, I think. I'm actually on the advisory board with Prop and Twiz, and we worked through the applications and narrowed it down to 4 to actually have scholarships to go.
Right.
And the first half of the trip is a week in Ethiopia, checking out coffee farms, really immersing these baristas into the coffee culture there. So not just coffee farms, but cafes, roasteries, just so they can get the full experience. And then after a week there in Ethiopia, they'll be traveling to Rwanda. And that's the second half of the trip that I'll be joining. It's like almost like a 3-week trip. So I couldn't be away that long. So I've been to Ethiopia before, never been to Rwanda. So I'll just join them.
And is it going to be the same concept in Rwanda where it's a coffee farm work, but also like cafe culture and kind of immersing yourself into what it's like out there?
Yep. So
Okay.
they want to get a good look at, that African, coffee culture as much as they can in
Right.
3 weeks.
And I've never gone on an origin trip, so excuse me if I'm missing something
Word.
obvious. But how similar or different are the like cafe cultures between Ethiopia and Rwanda? I don't necessarily know.
Well, I haven't been to Rwanda, but Ethiopia was interesting because they already have, over a century long coffee culture called the coffee ceremony. I think we talked about this before.
A little bit,
Yeah.
a little bit.
It-
Might have met some backlash.
Yeah, right. But yeah, the Ethiopian coffee ceremony is way different than how we enjoy coffee in the U.S. in the Western world. It's more of like you have this woman figure who roasts the coffee, grinds the coffee, and brews the coffee in a jabina. It's like this clay pot that they put over a fire, and they're boiling the water and coffee together, and then they'll distribute the coffee in cups similar to these, but a little bit smaller. And traditionally, it's been the older men in the community. They'll have the coffee first, and then the younger men, and then the older women, and then the younger women. And that's been centuries how Ethiopians have enjoyed coffee. But it wasn't until recently, and when I say recently, I'm talking like 20, 25 years, where this third wave idea of a cafe has entered into Ethiopia. So you have both worlds of old school and this new school concept that Ethiopians are mainly in Addis, in the capital, these heavily populated areas where people are, stepping into these cafes, and you'll see the espresso machine, you'll see, the grinder, the barista, you'll see these lattes, stuff like that. Even in like the kind of the touristy areas, like the resort hotels, you'll have like that cafe experience.
Okay. Word. So when was the last time you went to Ethiopia?
Man, that was, wow. I guess that was it was definitely after 2016, because I went with the World Coffee Events All-Stars. They basically, they pick and choose people who've won or who have placed in the top
Finals,
6,
right.
and they call them the all-stars, and they'll kind of pick and choose and match them up and bring them to different places where they feel like they can have the most impact on that culture and vice versa. So I think it was like 2017 that I went
Okay.
to Ethiopia with them. It was for the African Expo.
Mhm.
And so several countries were involved in it, and we did like a how to compete in a world barista competition because
Okay.
Ethiopia, unfortunately and surprisingly, does not participate in the barista
Oh, they
competition
don't participate at all.
at all
Okay.
because they don't have a specialty coffee association of Ethiopia.
That is okay. Cool.
Yeah.
No comment.
Yeah, it's kind of effed up, and I talked to a few people over there about, that, and it was weird. It was like some folks were saying that there wasn't an interest, yet when we put on this mock competition, we had 15 Ethiopian baristas sign up.
Right.
And who were interested in competition. And there are countries that compete on the world level that will only have 6 or 7 barista competitors at their nationals.
Right.
And we had 15 Ethiopian baristas
That just showed up just for
just
the
showed
idea
up.
of it.
They heard about it, showed up, and I mean, this wasn't advertised. It was like word of mouth,
Mhm.
and they just rolled up on us and was like,
Word.
"Yeah, we want to learn how to compete in a barista competition." And so we had this workshop of what the judges were looking for in the espresso round, the milk round, and then it was really cool. We went out on the streets of Addis with these baristas and picked up ingredients that were culturally significant to Ethiopia and brought these ingredients back. And we did a SIGBEV workshop with them. And then we did a mock competition for these baristas that wanted to participate, and 6 of them participated. And they did espresso and milk round, and they talked about the coffee, talked about the flavor notes, and it was pretty dope.
Word.
Yeah.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
I mean, so my intrigue is always there when it comes down to origin trips, more specifically with a African coffee origin trip.
Yeah.
Just because that's not only just the lineage of people of color, the story of coffee, but also just my own personal preference of the type of coffees I tend to go for.
Right.
You've seen it in
Yep.
my competition.
Diabenza.
Yeah, man.
Shout out.
Diabenza Carbonic Natural might still be my favorite coffee of all time. Like,
Yeah,
it
Coffee
was-
Black is going there.
Yeah, word.
Yeah, they're going there, man. That's that. And that was like, man, I really want to go back to Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
But one, the time commitment is huge.
Mm-hmm.
2, I mean, it ain't hard. It ain't easy.
Yeah.
It's a hard trip.
Mm.
And you could get sick
Right.
going to Ethiopia. I went with my buddy James Draper. Shout out to James. And so after the expo, because I was a part of counterculture, their Eastern African coffee buyer, Getu Bekele, who lives in Addis, he took me to Jima with a buddy of his who's a professor at Jima University.
Mhm.
And James Draper from WCE, he was like, "Can I tag along?" I was like, "Word, come on with us." And so we ate the same thing. We drank the same thing. We went to the same coffee ceremonies. And homeboy got sick. He was locked up in a hotel room for 3 days straight.
Man.
And I felt bad for him. So, you have to have your yellow fever vaccination, which I did years ago, and it's supposed to last for a lifetime. So I'm covered there. It's just the other like foodborne illnesses that I would be at a high risk of.
Higher
So,
risk. I've got you.
so that's another reason why, I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
But Diabenza, that trip to Diabenza,
That
man,
would-
I was
that would
like,
be sick.
man,
Yeah.
I really want to go.
I want to go, like,
Yeah.
real talk. Like, I got the immune system of like a squirrel. Like, I probably ain't got no business doing it. But like you've seen, like, I don't get sick often, but when
Right,
I get
right.
sick, I'm just down.
You
So
down,
like,
yeah.
I don't know, but like, dang, That would be so dope.
I mean, you
man.
just have to be really conscious of what you're eating, what you're drinking.
Mhm.
And I was lucky. I had Get2 with me. I was like, because they eat a lot of raw meat
Mhm.
over there. And I was like, Get2, just make sure I don't get anything raw.
They just
He was
cook
like, sure. And then, one night, we're at this bar. They had like, performances and whatnot. They had a band. And mead is a popular drink over there. And the mead was going around. And it's like juice.
Yeah.
And it
It'll
gets
get
you in
you.
trouble.
It'll get you.
And, they're bringing out food and everything. And, we're deep into eating.
Right.
And Get2 looks over, is like, yo, you didn't eat that, did you? It's like,
It's a
yeah,
little
man,
late.
I've been eating that. He's like, yeah, don't eat
Yeah,
any more
don't
of
do that. That's
yeah,
not,
don't eat any more of that. That's raw. That's raw beef. You don't want to eat that. Oh, thanks a lot, man.
I'd be done for in that situation because I'm really good with making sure I like hosting house guests, going places, like taking people out to dinner, doing dinner parties, whatever. I'm really good at making sure I don't end up in a space that conflicts with somebody's dietary restrictions or
Right.
religious, like whatever allergies, dietary restrictions, religious reasons, whatever, right? If we in a space and I think I've done all that, my guard goes all the way down.
Right.
So like, for example, totally nowhere near as extravagant as, being in another country. But my partner, she doesn't do dairy anymore because our youngest son is allergic to it.
Mm.
So she's like completely dairy free now, right? And yesterday was Sweetest Day, which I did not know was a thing until like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago.
It was
But
what day?
Sweetest Day. So
Sweetest?
Sweetest Day is the exact middle of the year, where it's the same amount of days before and after to Valentine's Day.
Oh, right on.
Right.
All right.
So the mind you, I did not know this thing existed until yeah. But,
Hey.
right. But but you're supposed to gift sweets like
Oh,
right.
got you.
So I have these cookies that I really, really, really love. And I'm like, yo, these like my favorite cookies in the world. Try this. Takes a bite. And then everybody's like, yo, those got milk in them, duh. And I'm like, oh,
My stomach
my
bubbling.
bad. Sorry. Well, my son's about to be mad at me for the next couple hours. But no, man, like I definitely like would love to go on those trips. I definitely want to just get an opportunity to be fully immersed into like what coffee culture is outside of here. Cause I think
Yeah.
that like not only is my understanding of coffee culture very Americanized, it's very East Coast Americanized.
Right,
Like you even
right.
see, and that's why I asked you the question of the difference between coffee culture in Ethiopia and Rwanda, because you see here that like coffee culture in New York is way different than coffee culture down here in North
Yep,
Carolina,
yep.
way different than the Pacific Northwest, way different than the Midwest, like so on and so forth. So like just to think of how many different versions of coffee and cafe culture we have here, I could only imagine what that's like from country to country,
Yeah,
even
yeah.
on the same continent. So
Yeah, Kenya was wild because they fully embraced that third wave. But the problem with Kenya, all that baller coffee gets exported, so they're left with the dregs,
Right.
so to speak, the lower quality coffee. And then the roasting is well developed, funny thing, Martin Shabaya, he's won the Kenyan barista competition several times, and getting in on the world level, he didn't do so well. There was a moment where he was the first African barista to make semifinals, but that was because of the what do you call that? The
Open service joint.
not open service. It was the not the lottery or whatever. It was like, so every team gets points, and the team with the highest points, their barista who had the lowest points goes to the semifinals.
Oh, okay. Word.
So he got to the semifinals, but he actually made finals recently because he teamed up with Sasha Sestic from Australia.
That'll do it.
That'll do it, right?
That'll get you to finals.
I mean, not only Sasha's got the skills, he's won the thing
Right.
before, but Sasha was able to get him a high quality Kenyan coffee that Martin didn't have access to, although he is Kenyan and lives in Kenya.
Right.
Which
Because
is
all that
wild.
gets exported out.
Right. So yeah. So seeing the cafe culture there, they're into like latte art. They were into, high quality. They were into pour overs. But the coffee itself was a lower quality of what you would see, in the U.S.
Right.
Specialty markets.
Okay.
And the roasting levels were a little bit darker.
Darker,
than
right.
You would see.
So, and I mean that's something that I tend to notice, just like out of the like main cafe consumption areas, you tend to see higher development coffees. You tend to see just very different expressions of what coffee can be than what we typically see over here, or like in the UK or even China, so on and so forth. One of my friends from New York for a good while was doing cafe and like just coffee consulting in Abu Dhabi for a really long time, and she was out there for a good while. Like I think she was out there maybe like somewhere between like 5 to 7 years, and like has recently come back to New York. And it's funny when like I go to her cafe, because like just even how she extracts and pulls coffee is just so different than how I would think of it, and that just comes from spending so much time in one of those spaces. Like I had an idea of like how I would extract and do coffee, and then I did competition for a really long time, and that's a completely different method of extracting coffee, and that has kind of been like the status quo for us, like at Black and White, just because that's where like our roots come from. Where it catches me off guard sometimes when I'm not in spaces that look at coffee in that same or extract in that same way. So it's just really interesting just to kind of see the full spectrum of like what you can do with coffee, like how it can taste, how people prefer their coffees in different parts of the world, and what they're expecting out of it. Because like we're not necessarily the most Nordic out there. So like, you go out to LA where everyone's trying to do the Nordic multi-roasted thing, and like our coffees would be too dark for a lot of those spaces, or like you go some places and our coffee isn't even anywhere near dark enough.
Right,
where like,
right.
You can get those emails sometimes. Hey, this isn't great coffee. I'm used to such and such. I'm not gonna throw names out there, make it sound like I'm shading anyone, but like everyone has different preferences. Everyone has different ways of expressing. So I'm really interested to see what that would look like in a place that has a completely different frame of reference than I do.
Yeah. South Africa was crazy too. It was different than, Kenya. It was different from Ethiopia. They were actually bringing coffees in because, South Africa doesn't grow coffee.
Right.
There was one farm like outside of Durban that was growing coffee, but it was like super low elevation, similar to like California, that coffee farm out there.
Yep.
But they don't grow coffee typically, so they're importing coffee.
Right.
And the multi roasters are importing, coffee roasters from around the world.
Right.
But there were a couple of really dope, roasters down there. Truth, they tend to do a little more on the development side. Father Coffee was one of my favorites out there. And then now, Winston Douglas, he's got his own thing going on called Cedar. And then my buddy out in Durban, Lineage Coffee, Craig, he's got something really dope going on out there. So that scene was different. The culture there was different from Kenya. It was different from Ethiopia. A lot of what I saw in South Africa, and this was like around the same time, 2017, 2018, was the coffee consumers weren't really jumping on board with the pricing of high quality coffee. They were used to low quality, over roasted, low price coffee. I can't remember what the dollar to rand is down there, but coffee was pretty cheap, but they want, like the roasters and the cafes, they needed it to be a lot higher because they wanted to purchase these $3-4 a pound coffees, and it just made sense to cover their margins to raise those prices.
And people kind of push back.
Yeah, they kind of push back.
We kind of still see, like, it's obviously less common here, like wide scale, but like you definitely see like people that are so used to what they knew coffee prices to be before that like there's kind of a pushback on specialty. Like I would rather, just go to a Dunkin', go to a corner store like in New York, like because coffee should be a cheap commodity, right?
Yeah.
My question for you now, because you brought up Ethiopia, you brought up Kenya, you brought up South Africa. I know about Panama. Where all have you gone for coffee? As a person that has gone literally nowhere other than a state
Yeah.
for coffee. Talk to me.
I mean, I've been around, and that all came from the barista competition, getting to Worlds, which was crazy. China is off the cuff. They're doing some wild stuff out there. They have pretty much the blueprints of like all these espresso machines and grinders, and they could just build them. So I'm walking into like these high end cafes where that looks like a Slayer, that looks like an EK43, and I'm talking to this like 20-something-year-old like owner of this immaculate cafe, and he's got like these beautiful women in there just taking selfies and just promoting this cafe on Instagram, and the place is packed out. And I'm like, dude, how'd you get a EK here? How'd you get a Slayer? He's like, oh, that's not a Slayer. That's not an EK.
It's a slower. It's a KE. We built that.
Yeah. I'm like, all right, word. All right, I feel you. Yeah, that's what's up. And he's like bringing in like Sasha's coffee. He's bringing in Onyx. He's bringing in roasters from the UK. So it was wild to see that, and it was wild because I had this whole different idea of what China was about, and then I get there and it just blew me away. I had coffee in Japan where like hospitality was like
top tier.
Yeah, top tier. And it may have just been like the company I was with, but I mean, it was just wow, dude. Like I've never been in any kind of like experience like that in the US.
So I'm gonna continue on that conversation in a sec, but I don't take nothing seriously. So just walk with me right quick. I gotta
right. You want to go back to the slower?
No. I mean, yes, but so
two groups slower.
Nah. So like, all right. So we got the freestyle. We got the great value version of the espresso machine. Right? What if they started like making knockoff of the roasters?
Hey.
Like what if they just like found a way to get your curves and was like, hey man, we finna make white and black roasters out.
The curves are out there. The curves are out there, right?
Like Onyx with an eye or something like that.
Onyx.
Yo, man, like in my brain, I'm like, yo, how far can we take bootlegging this?
But it's crazy, right? So there was all these immaculate cafes in China. I went to Guangzhou, went to Hangzhou. I went to Pu'er in Yunnan province. And these cafes were just dope. And I'm like, why y'all importing these different roasters? And they're like, well, we only have like 2 or 3 really big coffee roasters, and they're massive, and they're in Shanghai, they're in Beijing, and they roast coffee for the country.
Right.
And it's all like over roasted. It's lower end coffee. And so my thing was like, all right, so you got these dope cafes. All y'all need now are some like small craft roasters to pop up in these different cities. And these aren't small cities. I mean, like Hangzhou has like 7-8 million people. Guangzhou, I think it was like 14 million people. And Pu'er had like 5 million, and they call that a little village. Right. So there's room for these like roasters to pop up, and I'm sure they know how to build roasters. So that's the next step because they're already growing coffee in China, and we had some of that in Mancheba. We had that at Black and White from our friends over at Torch Coffee.
Yeah, that Mancheba was sick.
Right?
Once you said it out, like my brain did a little.
Right.
Yeah,
grown in freaking China, man. Like amongst like 100-year-old like tea plants. You know.
So, what are some of the standout differences that you notice when you travel to a place that is primarily cafe culture as opposed to like an origin trip where they're typically the exporters and not the importers of coffee?
So I recently went to Colombia, and although Bogota has cafes, third wave cafes, and we saw some of those, the farmers, like say in Colombia or in Nicaragua,
Mhm.
I went. That was one of my first origin trips. They'll grow the coffee, they'll process the coffee, or if they belong to a co-op, they'll send the cherries to the co-op,
Mhm.
and then they're done with it, and then they start their year over. So they don't know where the coffee goes. They don't know who does what to the coffee. It's just like I've grown this thing, I've sold it, and now I'm back to the beginning of my season. And they don't get any feedback from roasters or cafes or baristas. So it's a different vibe, especially when you hear them say that. I have no idea where this coffee goes.
Mhm.
And that was in my trip to Colombia. You know, these farmers we were interviewing them, and they were, yeah, I always wanted to know where the coffee went. And so I whip out my phone and I show her our cafe
Right.
where we had the in-house latte art throwdown,
Yeah.
and I'm flipping through the pictures, and she just starts crying, man. She's like, "Oh wow, that's beautiful. I never seen anything like that. I never knew what happened to the coffee, that
It's
culture."
beautiful for them in that moment. It does ring a very like large red flag for me about just how we communicate
Yeah.
information in the coffee industry, because the specialty side of the industry is really rooted on traceability.
Yep.
They really pride themselves on the fact that you can go all the way back and identify where this came from. Like they kind of ancestry.com it in a lot of ways.
Mm.
And I almost I would find it like pretty offensive to think that like, hey, we can trace back all this way, but you can't follow the trajectory of where you're going, because none of this happens without what happens at the farm or origin level. So like to me, it's kind of weird to not have access to that knowledge or to records of like, hey, here's all the places that my coffee is touched. Because as a coffee roaster, you can easily track, hey, we've served coffee in such and such states, this amount of coffee we've sent out to this many people, and we've reached this many counties or whatever.
Yeah.
Why can't that be done all the way?
Yeah.
Why can't that be done?
And there are coffee producers who know where the coffee goes.
Yeah.
There are coffee producers that make it to Expo
Right.
in the U.S.
My point is, it should be commonplace.
Right. It should be commonplace. Just like it should be commonplace for that barista
Mhm.
to know where that coffee came from,
Right.
what that coffee producer went through to get that coffee
Mhm.
to that barista.
Right.
And you have baristas that have no idea.
Right.
You said yourself, you haven't been to Origin.
Right.
I think going to Origin puts everything into context,
Right.
because it shows you how you're a part of that coffee supply chain.
And that's the thing. I totally believe that it is a important rite of passage for someone on the consumer-ish end of the industry to go to Origin and kind of understand this fully, rather than, kind of being a spokesperson for something that they don't get. I have always felt like that is a shortcoming of my career, that I haven't gotten to do that yet. But I also understand that that's been very circumstantial. I was supposed to go on an Origin trip in 2020.
Yeah, I remember.
and-
I remember that. Yeah.
And my grandfather passed the
Yeah.
week before I was supposed to leave, so I stayed back for his funeral. Conversations. Well, that was 2019. My apologies. Conversations happened for me to potentially go on a follow up one, and then the world shut down because of
Yeah.
COVID. So I do have an understanding that like as I started to get to a point where it was clear that coffee was going to be my career, I made it a priority of like, hey, this is something that I need to do.
Yeah.
And then things happened. But like, it's not really as hard for me to find the lineage of where a coffee comes from on my end
Mm.
as it is for a grower or a farmer producer
Right.
to do that the opposite direction. And that to me is wrong,
Yeah.
because there shouldn't be a cutoff where you're like, I don't know where it's going after this.
Thanks
It's
to the
like-
coffee.
Yeah, that's like that's like saying, hey, yo, I sent like these materials out into the world and I don't know what's being made with them. I don't know, like, like that doesn't that doesn't complete the cycle that this industry is claiming it's all about.
Yeah.
So that's something that needs to be adjusted like ASAP. That's
Yeah.
something that like if I am going to be a part of this or like part of that chain in any way, shape, or form, I would make it a mission to see change because it's just it's a problem where we're starting to see people do this virtual signaling and like, oh, we're so much more ethical and we do right by these people, and like you're giving a story that you can't really confirm because you're keeping people out of the loop of knowledge and information of what's actually going on. How do we know this is impacting them? It's like I'm blanking, but I think it's no, it's not the Del Agua program. There's another program. We had them actually come to the roastery and do a talk with us a while
Oh,
back.
Equation.
Yeah, where they were talking about some of the other initiatives that they like, the other crops that they're getting
Yep.
farmers to be able to use on their land, and like be able to make sure that like they're not relegated to just how lucrative coffee can be at a given
Yep.
point in time,
Yep.
and like equipping them with more versatile skills and versatile like streams of income. And like that's at least a step in the right direction of
Yep.
like, hey, we're going to actually put our money and our efforts towards making sure that this is sustainable across the board.
Yep.
So like I just need to see a lot more of that happening because there's way too large of a net that we cast with specialty coffee that doesn't go back all the way to the absolute beginning of the chain.
Yeah. What Juan is doing down there with Equation is amazing. And that's who we went to visit to see firsthand what coffee producers are doing.
Right.
One, to mitigate, climate change, how it's affecting quantity and quality of their coffee. Right now, a lot of the coffee producers in that region where we visited, right outside of Bogota, they've been experiencing the effects of, low demand for those coffees. And so what Equation has been doing is teaching them how to plant other things on their farm. One, to strengthen that root structure to prevent erosion.
Right.
And when those rains continue to flow, it'll help protect against, washing away that topsoil. And then these crops, these extra crops that they're growing, they can harvest 2 or 3 times a year versus coffee, which is one time a year. And they can sell these crops to, supplement their income.
Right.
And I thought that was pretty dope to see that.
No, it definitely is. It's just,
And it would be great if this could be replicated in other places, especially like Ethiopia and Kenya.
right. Like it's great. It's my frustration in hearing the things that I'm hearing is that it is a one of its kind initiative.
Yeah.
We just got to do better at that, like collectively.
Yep.
So yeah. But word. All that to say, at some point I do need to go on an Oregon trip. I need to fill that gap in my career, and I hope that the things that I prioritize right now, the things that I care about and value when it comes down to this industry are, one, like strengthened and reinforced by a trip like this, but also like modified. Like I want to get the opportunity to be able to go and learn like, hey, these are actually the things that matter as you're talking about this, but we want this,
Yeah.
And like, I've had this conversation about like just a lot of things in the world, just, social dynamics, so on and so forth. But like, you have an idea of what properly advocating and properly being someone that is going to support the right causes, even for things you don't identify with personally, looks like. And it isn't until you hear from the actual subjects of the people that are actually dealing with it, the people that are actually going through that lived experience, that you learn and modify what you thought was supporting them and what actually supporting them looks like. So like that's something that I do hope gets like strengthened and modified for me in a chance of going to an Origin trip, because I will be better equipped to talk about things more with more knowledge and not just like from the stories that are second and third hand that I currently get.
With more and more coffee roasters, investing in coffee producers year after year, establishing a relationship and continuing to purchase not the same amount, but more each year. And their cafes that they sell to, investing in purchasing those coffees. Do you think an origin trip with that roaster to bring on, cafe owners or baristas or managers or some of the roasters in the roasting company can help solidify that relationship with those coffee producers?
Yeah, I do in some ways, but like I also have to be like realistic. Like it's not like everybody's making millions off
Right.
of this. Like there are select groups that are. There are select groups that are benefiting this in a much larger way than others. And there is a interest in seeing how those places are able to not just give back, but kind of like help supplement this growing even further. Like there's a part of like putting your resources and your money where your mouth is to ensure that this ecosystem grows stronger. And it does ultimately come back to then benefit you as well. But I can't necessarily say every, small craft roaster can send, a staff of people on an
Right.
origin trip. Like, but I do think that there being more conduits and ways to make that commonplace, to make it something that people are able to do, and like also within reason, because like you can't just expect farmers to be like, hey, I'm gonna host a bunch of people at my house while I'm growing coffee in the middle of my
Right,
work season.
right.
Like there's got to be ways to develop. There's got to be ways to develop a system that allows the user inside, or like the last step in the chain before the user, to be more educated, properly be able to speak on these things. Even if they can't represent everything perfectly, at least have context
Yeah.
and understand properly. And then on the opposite end, there's got to be ways to make sure that we're not losing the end goal in translation.
Right.
Making sure that what it is that these farmers do care about, these producers, whoever, are being replicated properly across the board.
Yeah.
Because without them, none of this exists. So how do we make sure that we're still properly championing them in every step of this, and not just championing them in our own words? Like, oh, this is what I think you want. No, this is what you say. So here's how we implement that. Here's how we follow through on what you're looking for, not just, creating our own social cause off of your hard work.
Yeah. There's got to be a way, man. Because, I mean, here in the U.S., for people who love wine, they can roll up on, Napa Valley and see, these producers out there. They can actually go up in a tasting room and taste these wines and purchase the wines, and it's not cheap.
Right.
They're dropping coin on, getting out there.
Right.
And, my first origin trip was Nicaragua, and it was like an eco farm where they had cabins that we stayed, and, there was coffee everywhere, same thing with La Palma. They have, this eco kind of resort area where you can stay on the farm. So there's got to be other, like eco-tourist areas in, these coffee producing countries where something can be set up for consumers to link up with roasters, and these roasters establish some sort of origin trip to bring that experience that the consumer has to the roaster, to the coffee producer, so they can kind of mash up and talk.
Yeah.
But again, I would hate for it to turn into like, this kind of like, oh, we're going to go see these coffee producers, these poor coffee producers.
Right.
And
Yeah.
go
That like
there
that's
and,
what I want to end. I
let's
want to
take some
end the
photos
like
with,
Yeah, I want to end the like trauma tourism of it.
Yeah.
Like I hate the we're gonna sound like the most moral people in the world because we bought this coffee narrative that like
Yeah.
the user in gets. I really care more about closing that gap and
Yeah.
like getting people to learn that like there's so much skill, there's so much intellect, there's so much nuance that goes into being able to make coffee what it is, that comes from the people at the very beginning of this,
Yeah.
the producers, and being able to understand it in a similar way to like what happens at like a Napa Valley and wine.
Yeah.
Not to say that everything needs to be super elevated and we can only serve coffee if it's like the top tier, top end of
Do you
it.
think
but,
it's
like,
because coffee was so colonized and
yeah,
Yeah.
it's that, and it was so colonized, and then it was so downplayed in like it's this thing that people just expect to be there.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean places
it's
have
just coffee.
Yeah, it's just coffee.
Yeah.
You know, and like there's a space for all of those things.
But there are lives behind that. It's
Exactly.
just coffee, and for you to
Exactly.
say it's just coffee negates all this hard work,
Exactly.
this dedication,
Negates
the
someone's
struggle.
reality.
Because you're by saying it's just coffee, you're justifying that below dollar per pound, which
Exactly.
is way less than what it costs for that coffee
to
producer
make it.
to make a pound of coffee.
Right.
You know?
And it's like, and it's not to say, oh, poor farmer, they're in need and we need to just help them. Not to say that like they're just helpless. No, these are amazingly talented people that are putting out a
Yeah,
product.
we
that
should flip
like.
that and
Exactly.
say poor consumer for thinking like that.
Exactly.
You know,
How do we-
you're in the wrong space
Right.
by thinking like that. Shame on you. Poor you.
Right.
know?
But how do we flip that to
Yeah.
get people to understand why it matters, care about it mattering at that point, to then want to invest more into it, but also at the same time shine the light on the fact that like it wasn't necessarily the consumer's fault that we now see it this
Right.
way. It's how do we break down that structure that was presented that even put us in this position?
Give them a basket, put them on a slope like this, and tell them to pick coffee for at least an hour.
Man,
Then they'll say it's
They'd be
not
like-
just
they'd be
coffee.
like, you got it.
Shout
you
out to James Yoder, man. That's a
Not
dope.
just
That's a dope
coffee.
time. Not just coffee.
Nice
out,
little
out in
segue.
Charlotte. Yeah.
sir. Hey man, it's yeah, man. But no. So all that to say,
Yeah.
Origin trip is
Origin trip.
needed soon. I need to do one for me to feel like not a complete coffee professional, but like a real one. Because like I've always felt like that was the missing piece. I felt like I had two missing pieces.
Yeah.
It was for the American side. It was I had never been to the Pacific Northwest. Like
Oh,
in
word,
Seattle
word. You did that?
until
Yeah.
got that one out the way. So now I gotta go to Origin. I gotta understand this in a way that isn't just second and third hand knowledge. You know.
One origin trip that did blow my mind was Brazil,
Okay.
because I'm wherever I go, I try not to have any expectations.
Mhm.
But Brazilian coffee had always been driven into my mind as low elevation, low quality. All of the coffee is grown on flat land, harvested by mechanical harvesters. And that is true to some point. But when I went, Ally, the importer from South Carolina, they took us to Espírito Santo, and there was elevation. There was mountainous regions. It looked like Colombia. It wasn't as high as Colombia, but there was all these different microclimates. And I was like, I had no idea. This is Brazil.
Right.
And the coffees that we tasted did not taste like those traditional Brazilian coffees that I tasted.
Right.
They were harvested by hand. You couldn't have mechanical harvesters on peaks and slopes, you know.
Mhm.
So that was completely mind blowing. And then we went out to Minister Rice, and everything was flat.
Right.
Everything was grown like corn is grown here in the U.S.
Mhm.
We actually got to ride on the back of these dump trucks, where dump truck is going down one aisle of coffee, and this mechanical harvester is going down the other, and they're shooting, it's harvesting coffee and branches and leaves and bugs and
Mhm.
all this stuff is going in the back of this truck with us. And that was kind of cool to see. But they were doing something at this one farm that, we went to, they were doing something different that I'd never heard of. So they were trying to figure out the best time to harvest coffee at its sweetest point.
Okay.
And so they had these massive, like 10-foot tall coffee trees, and these harvesters could harvest the top, the middle, or the bottom.
Mhm.
And they found that at midnight to 3 a.m., if they harvested the top and the bottom, they got the sweetest coffees.
Mhm.
And so we jumped on the back of a dump truck at like
midnight.
1 o'clock in the morning to experience it. And it was pretty dope to see that, you know. But just having my mind blown about, you know, Espiritu Santo versus Minister Rice was kind of cool.
Yeah, so you got a chance to challenge preconceived notions
Yeah.
and like learn like the reality behind it,
Yeah.
which is ultimately the thing that I think you get to pick up the most about going on an origin trip. So for those coffee professionals out there, like that is something that if the opportunity presents itself, you want to make happen. It's going to help elevate just your understanding of this industry at large and be able to be better at it.
For real.
So yeah. I think we hit the nail on the head with that one, man.
Yeah, word.
Yes, sir.
So can we get another shout out to GH?
Absolutely.
Our sponsor, our first sponsor. Dope. I
Shout
can't
out
believe
to
it.
Commercial.
It's-
We got
yeah,
one,
really
man.
cool.
We working, and I'm excited.
Shout out to GH Grinding and Brewing Solutions. Thank you for sponsoring us. Yo, if you guys out there listening or watching have any questions about, you know, Chiato or any of the grinders that they have at ghgrindingandbrewing-solutions.com, you should check them out. Yeah, shoot us a comment. They have hand grinders.
Yes, they do.
They've got grinders for commercial use, home use.
I may or may not know how to fix them. So
Yeah.
like if you got questions about
Yeah,
how
for
your
real.
thing works,
Yeah,
you hit
yeah.
me up. I might be of use. So definitely GH, thank you guys so much. You know, Gary, Travis, Josh, all y'all over there. Thank y'all for everything.
For real.
And we're gonna keep trying to bring y'all some really dope content. 95 Plus is pushing forward.
Should we do a giveaway? Can we do a giveaway?
What we
Let's
got
do a
to give
giveaway in the
I'm
next
broke.
episode.
What we giving away?
I don't know. We should give away something. We can find something to give away.
Hey, we're gonna
Maybe we
figure
should
it
do a
out. Man.
contest.
We're gonna come up with something dope.
Yeah,
man.
we'll come up with something.
Yes,
What do
sir.
y'all want?
Yeah, let us know, man.
Hit us in the comments.
If
you
y'all
know?
made it this
Hit us
far
in
into the
comments.
episode, chances are you might have a better shot at it because you pay attention to us. You see
For
what's
real.
going on. You probably got the noties on.
Yup.
We appreciate y'all. With that being said, this has been another episode of the 95 Plus Podcast. I'm Anthony Ragler.
I'm Lynn
That's
Butler.
Lynn Butler. We're going to see y'all soon. Peace.
2 times. Thank you for tuning in to 95 Plus Podcast. And a big shout out to our sponsor for this episode, GH Grinding and Brewing Solutions. You can check them out on their website, ghgbs.com. They are the significant best grinding and brewing solutions for North America, Canada, and Latin America. So check them out on their website. Again, thank you all for tuning in to 95 Plus Podcast. And shout out to our sponsor, GH Grinding and Brewing Solution. Peace. 2 times.